At 34 years old, you'd think I'd have finally learned that fairness doesn't exist in my in-laws' world. Still, I found myself foolishly hoping that this Christmas, things might be different. Instead, I stood in the opulent living room of my husband's family estate, watching the joy slowly drain from my 8-year-old daughter's face. One by one, presents were distributed to all the other children, their names called out with practiced excitement, but Lily's name, it never came. 10 years of marriage to Jason had taught me one thing about the Wilsons. They lived by a silent code, a maze of unwritten expectations and ancestral pride that I never quite managed to navigate. They came from old money, and I, despite my best efforts, was always the outsider who hadn't read the rulebook. Lily sat quietly, her glossy patent leather shoes tapping gently on the polished hardwood floor. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she sat with her gift still clutched in her lap, her small hands gripping the neatly wrapped watercolor painting she had made with so much care. Her silent dignity, her refusal to show hurt, it tore through me in a way that sobbing never could. Then Jason stood up. Without a word, he reached into his tailored blazer and from the inner pocket pulled out a simple white envelope. But let's rewind just a bit. For anyone watching this and wondering how such a gesture left an entire room of wealthy, self-assured socialites utterly dumbfounded, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next turned everything on its head. Jason and I met in college. He was the confident business major, effortlessly charming, son of wealth and prestige. I was an education student, constantly juggling multiple part-time jobs just to keep the tuition bills paid. We might as well have come from different worlds, and in many ways we did. His parents, Marcus and Eleanor Wilson, were quick to make their opinions known. From the very first time I met them, Eleanor, with her immaculately coiffed hair and designer scarf knotted just so, had looked me over with the polite revulsion one might reserve for a knockoff handbag. "She's very quaint," she had remarked to Jason, her tone dripping with the suggestion that I was somehow adorably inferior. My modest, off-the-rack dress had barely warranted her glance. Despite their clear disapproval, Jason proposed after 2 years together. Our wedding wasn't the grand affair Eleanor had likely envisioned for her only son. It was intimate, personal, far more love than spectacle. But instead of narrowing the rift between us, it widened it. In her eyes, I'd stolen away her golden boy with nothing more than a smile and stubborn persistence. Jason's family didn't just have money, they had a legacy. The kind of wealth that came with heirlooms, trust funds, and properties across the globe that sat empty 11 months of the year. Their cottage in the Hamptons had more bathrooms than the apartment building I grew up in. Marcus, Jason's father, had inherited the family investment firm and built it into a financial empire. His children, Jason, Grace, and Matthew, had never once worried about making rent or stretching a meal budget. Our daughter Lily was born 2 years after we married, and while Eleanor dutifully posted photos of her newest grandchild to maintain appearances, the emotional connection was always missing. There was no emotional connection. There was no connection. Eleanor had favorites, and they weren't hard to spot. Grace, the favored daughter, had married the son of a state senator. Her children were Eleanor's pride and joy. Photos of them lined the hallways, their accomplishments narrated at every dinner. They were paraded like trophies, recipients of hand-stitched monogrammed gifts and piano lessons with renowned instructors. Lily, in contrast, was a dreamer, a quiet, thoughtful child who preferred sketchbooks to smartphones and imagination to material things. She didn't fit into Eleanor's gilded vision of success, and for that, she was largely ignored. "She's just like you," Eleanor often said, never meaning it as a compliment. As Christmas approached, so did the familiar dread. Eleanor's annual celebration was less a holiday gathering and more a carefully choreographed display of perfection. From imported floral arrangements to velvet ribbons imported from France, every detail was curated for maximum social impact. Seating charts were deliberate, and somehow, I always found myself separated from Jason, assigned to a table with distant cousins or firm partners I barely knew. This year, Lily had been more excited than ever. She had recently won first place in her school's winter art contest, and she poured her heart into a watercolor landscape she hoped would impress her grandparents. "Do you think Grandma will hang it in the hallway with the other pictures?" she had asked the night before, her voice full of hope as she wrapped it in the same paper Jason had used for his corporate holiday gifts. I wanted to believe, but I didn't have the heart to lie. "That would be lovely," I said, as neutrally as possible. Jason, ever the optimist, tried to reassure me. "They're coming around," he insisted. "You'll see, they're just different." He believed it, or at least, He wanted to. That morning, Lily rose with the sun, her eyes bright and full of anticipation. She insisted on wearing the red velvet dress Eleanor had sent the year before, even though it now pinched at the shoulders and barely zipped up the back. "Grandma gave it to me," she said proudly, as if the gesture alone granted her some invisible approval. The drive to the Wilson estate in Greenwich was long, lined with towering trees and estates behind wrought iron gates. As the car curved up the circular drive, flanked by a parade of imported vehicles, Lily sat perfectly still, her painting resting carefully on her lap. Jason squeezed my hand as we parked. "This year will be different," he whispered. I gave a half-hearted nod, not believing him, but grateful for his attempt. The front door swung open before we could even knock. Uniformed staff stood at attention. Every ribbon, every bauble on the towering garlands matched. The wreath alone probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. Eleanor emerged, radiant in a winter white ensemble that likely cost more than our furniture. "Jason, darling," she called, offering him a cheek kiss. When she saw me, her smile flattened. "Heather, your sweater is festive." And then she turned to Lily, who stood quietly beside me, holding her painting. "And Lily," Eleanor said, bending slightly, "my goodness, how tall you've grown." Her eyes flicked to the package in Lily's hands, then away. "The other children are in the playroom. Margot's showing off her new riding ribbons." Before Lily could speak, Eleanor was gone, greeting a newly arrived family. Jason gave Lily a gentle nudge. "Go on, sweetheart, we're right here." She nodded, her small frame walking toward the playroom, still holding her unoffered gift. The Wilson home was dazzling. The trees soared above us, adorned with antique European ornaments and color-coordinated bows. Garlands framed each doorway, and delicate floral centerpieces rested on every table. It was breathtaking, but it was also cold. All beauty, no heart. And so, the stage was set for the moment Jason would change everything, with nothing but an envelope. As we navigated the expansive halls of the Wilson estate, the atmosphere buzzed with the kind of curated charm that only generational wealth could produce. Jason was welcomed warmly by nearly everyone we passed. Firm handshakes, hearty backslaps, and jokes exchanged with genuine familiarity. I, on the other hand, received smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, nods that bordered on dismissive, and greetings that felt more obligatory than sincere. Grace, Jason's older sister, and the undisputed star of Eleanor's affections, quickly intercepted him, all but ignoring my presence. Her voice rang out in cheerful tones as she launched into a detailed account of their latest family ski trip to Aspen. She skillfully avoided mentioning the fact that Jason and I hadn't been invited. We both knew why. Our inclusion would have disrupted the family image they worked so hard to curate. Finally turning to acknowledge me, Grace offered a well-rehearsed smile. "Heather, you look well," she said, her gaze scanning my outfit with surgical precision. My red cashmere sweater and tailored black slacks had felt elegant when I left the house. Now, under the critical glow of a family obsessed with status, they seemed woefully plain. "Have you done something different with your hair?" she asked, eyes fixed on my shoulder-length bob. "Not really," I replied, lifting a hand self-consciously to my hair. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into something too knowing to be kind. Bold choice. Before I could respond, Andrew, Jason's younger brother, entered with his wife Stephanie and their trio of flawlessly dressed children. Andrew had always been the most approachable of Jason's siblings. He greeted me with a quick hug and a genuine, "Good to see you." Stephanie, however, was cut from Eleanor's mold, effortlessly polished, strategically pleasant, and quietly condescending. "Heather," Stephanie greeted me with an airy double-air kiss. "We missed you at the charity gala last month, though I imagine teaching keeps you terribly busy. It's admirable, really, how dedicated you are to your career." The pause before career wasn't accidental. The implication was as sharp as glass. None of the other Wilson wives worked, and my job as an elementary school art teacher was viewed less as a profession and more as a charming quirk. "I love teaching," I said plainly, unwilling to play their game. I excused myself and drifted toward the bar, tucked discreetly in the corner of the sitting room. An actual bartender, hired for the family event, offered me a polished smile. "What can I get you, ma'am?" "White wine, please," I replied. "Heavy pour." "Make it a double," a familiar voice chimed in beside me. I turned to see Diana, Andrew's sister-in-law, on Stephanie's side. She was one of the few people I genuinely looked forward to seeing at these events. She had the rare ability to see through the social performances and find humor in the absurdity. If I have to hear Eleanor gush about her summer in Provence one more time, I might chug the whole bottle, Diana said with an exaggerated sigh. I chuckled and lifted my glass in solidarity. How long have you been here? 45 excruciating minutes, she replied, eyes rolling. So far, I've been asked if I've considered Botox and told my dress would be more flattering if I wore shapewear. We clinked glasses quietly, a shared toast to surviving yet another gilded circus. As I took a sip, I caught sight of Lily across the room. She had just come out of the playroom, her expression subdued. I gently excused myself and crossed the room to meet her. Everything okay, sweetheart? I asked, crouching slightly. She shrugged, her voice barely above a whisper. Margot said my dress is from last year, and Emma told me her mom said you can't afford to send me to the right schools. I felt a surge of rage flare in my chest. These weren't innocent playground observations. They were echoes, reflections of the judgmental words spoken behind closed doors by adults who should have known better. That wasn't a very kind thing to say, I replied, keeping my voice level. You know how proud we are of you, right? She nodded slowly. Where's your painting? I asked. I put it under the tree, she said. Grandpa Marcus said that's where all the gifts go. I followed her gaze to the base of the towering Christmas tree. Among the immaculately wrapped gifts in custom-printed gold foil paper, Lily's modest, hand-wrapped painting stood out. The sight pierced through me. A beautiful, heartfelt gift nestled among packages chosen by assistants. Eleanor appeared just then, holding a champagne flute and smiling in Lily's direction. Lily, darling, the children are having dessert in the kitchen. Go enjoy some cake. Lily gave me a quick hug and walked off. Eleanor turned to me, tone instantly shifting. Heather, I've been meaning to ask, have you considered St. Margaret's for Lily? All the grandchildren attend. I kept my smile neutral. Lily loves her school. She's thriving. Eleanor sighed dramatically, as though I'd failed a simple test. Well, I suppose public school is adequate. But these early years are critical. The right foundation opens doors, especially for college admissions. She's 8, Eleanor, I said calmly. Precisely, she replied, her voice dipped in condescension. She patted my arm like I was a well-meaning but misguided child. Just think about it. If tuition is a concern, the family could help. Before I could reply, she floated away, drawn to another cluster of guests, leaving me burning with quiet anger. The implication that we couldn't provide for our daughter wasn't new. Despite Jason's steady career and our comfortable life, our modest lifestyle never met Wilson's standards. I found Jason in the study, locked in conversation with his father. Marcus Wilson, even in his 70s, commanded the room with his towering presence and perfectly tailored suit. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his confidence palpable. The moment I entered, their conversation halted. Am I interrupting? I asked lightly. Not at all, Jason said, though Marcus's tightened expression told a different story. Just discussing some family business, Marcus replied coolly. Eleanor probably needs help with dinner preparations. The suggestion wasn't subtle. In Marcus's world, wives belonged in kitchens or charity boards, not involved in matters of finance or legacy. Actually, Jason cut in, I was telling Dad about Lily's win in the school art competition. Marcus didn't react. Yes, very nice, he said with all the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging a weather report. Of course, Grace's Emma has just been accepted into the junior symphony, 8 years old and already performing at a 6th grade level. Lily's painting was selected over entries from older students, I said, unable to hold back. The judge was from the Metropolitan Museum. How nice, Marcus murmured, clearly unimpressed. Then, with a touch of performative pride, he added, speaking of accomplishments, Jason mentioned we finalized Emma and Tyler's trust funds. Never too early to secure their futures. The message was clear. Lily wasn't included. I turned to Jason, silently pleading for him to speak up. His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. A uniformed server appeared at the doorway, his posture impeccable as he addressed the room. Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson has asked me to inform everyone that dinner will be served in 5 minutes. Thank you, James, Marcus replied, rising from his seat with the slow, deliberate authority of someone used to being obeyed. We'd better not keep Eleanor waiting. She's been planning this meal for weeks. Jason and I followed him into the dining room. He squeezed my hand in a silent apology, his fingers brushing mine with familiar warmth. I gave a small squeeze in return, though inside I was filled with disappointment. Once again, Jason had let his father subtly diminish us, and worse, diminish Lily, without speaking up. The tension I'd been trying to suppress was steadily building. and dinner hadn't even started. I had no idea just how far things would unravel before the night was over. Eleanor's dining room was the very image of a luxury lifestyle magazine spread. The long extended table gleamed under the massive chandelier, ready for 24 guests. Down the center ran a lavish centerpiece of white roses and gilded pine cones, artfully intertwined with cedar and eucalyptus, creating an opulent display that stretched the length of the table. Tapered candles flickered in crystal holders, casting golden light across plates of bone china rimmed in platinum, polished silverware, and sparkling glasses that caught the warm glow beautifully. Elegant name cards marked each place, a reminder that even seating was a matter of careful orchestration. Jason, predictably, had been placed at the head of the table near his father. I, however, was seated 3 chairs down, between a distant cousin's reserved husband, whose name escaped me, and one of Marcus's longtime business partners, a man who radiated boardroom confidence and exactly zero warmth. Lily had been assigned a seat at the children's table in the adjoining breakfast nook, close enough to see us but far enough to feel excluded. Diana, thank goodness, was seated across from me. She glanced at the elaborate centerpiece, then leaned in and whispered, "I think that thing might actually violate building code." I stifled a laugh, grateful for her dry humor in this ornate minefield of egos. The first course arrived, an elegantly plated butternut squash soup, garnished with creme fraiche and a whisper of truffle oil. As we ate, Eleanor, perfectly composed at the opposite end of the table, steered the conversation like an orchestra conductor, ensuring the spotlight fell only where she intended. "Grace, darling, tell everyone about Emma's violin recital," she prompted with theatrical delight. Grace needed no further encouragement. She launched into a glowing narrative of Emma's latest performance, complete with anecdotes about stage presence and the judge's praise. Eleanor beamed, adding with practiced pride, "We've already begun looking into Juilliard's pre-college program, never too early." "Stephanie, didn't Tyler win a medal at that swim meet?" she continued smoothly, ensuring each grandchild from her favored lineage received their turn in the spotlight. And so the dinner progressed, each family accomplishment polished and placed on display like the silverware. Jason made 2 valiant attempts to interject, to mention Lily's recent first-place art award, but both times Eleanor deftly redirected the conversation before he could finish. It was as if Lily's achievement simply didn't exist. From my seat, I could see Lily watching from the children's table, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes flicking between her cousins and the adults speaking about them. Her little shoulders seemed to slump just a bit more with each cheer that wasn't for her. I wanted to stand up, drag my chair over beside her, and sing her praises myself, but I sat still, biting my lip hard enough to sting. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. The man beside me, Marcus's associate, whose name I'd already forgotten, turned with a faint smile. "Jason tells me you're a teacher." "Yes," I replied with forced politeness. "Elementary art education." "How quaint," he remarked, echoing Eleanor's trademark belittlement. "My wife used to volunteer at a school before we had children. She found it very fulfilling to give back." I nearly choked on my soup. Giving back? As if my career, my passion, was some charitable pastime. I nodded, forcing a tight smile, and choosing to focus on my meal, instead of explaining that I worked not for leisure, but because I loved it, because it mattered. The main course was brought out, a sumptuous beef Wellington with perfectly crisp pastry, served alongside roasted root vegetables and decadent potatoes dauphinoise. Around me, the conversation turned to the latest family topic of pride, vacation homes. Grace and her husband discussed their plans to buy a second property in Vail to complement their beachfront Hamptons estate. Andrew and Stephanie casually mentioned their recent trip to Tuscany to view villas. Eleanor, who had remained quiet for a moment, then turned to Jason with a syrupy tone. "What about you, Jason? Still in that little starter home? 8 years now, isn't it?" Our 3-bedroom colonial in a great school district, where Lily had friends and I had a manageable commute, was far from a starter home, but Eleanor said it like we were squatting in some dilapidated rental. "We love our neighborhood," Jason said evenly. "Lily's school is excellent, and Heather's commute is reasonable." "Well," Eleanor sighed with a tilt of her head, "when you're ready to upgrade to something more suitable, your father and I would be happy to help." Her voice made it sound like she was offering us a lifeline rather than dangling a chain. Around the table, I caught the subtle shifts, relatives glancing down, uncomfortable, recognizing the insult but unwilling to challenge it. It was par for the course in the Wilson household. Marcus cleared his throat, reclaiming attention. "Speaking of properties, we've decided to open the Aspen house for New Year's. Family only, of course. Grace, Andrew, we'll expect you both." The message rang clear. Jason and I were not included. The air thickened with silence. Perhaps Lily could join her cousins, Eleanor offered suddenly, her tone magnanimous, as if she were granting a great favor. It would be good for her to spend more time with family. My jaw clenched. The invitation was for Lily, not for us. Not for me. A not-so-subtle reminder of where I stood in their hierarchy. Before I could say anything, Jason stepped in. We already have plans for New Year's, but thank you, Mom. We had no such plans, and I knew it. But I shot him a look of gratitude, grateful for the graceful out. Dessert was served, an elaborate bouquet de Noël crafted by Eleanor's chef, naturally. And just as the first slices were plated, Marcus rose from his chair with the gravitas of a man delivering a boardroom keynote. He lifted his glass of aged cognac high. To family, he began, his voice booming. Our greatest blessing and legacy. Everyone raised their glasses, and Marcus continued, moving from toast to toast. To Grace and Philip, whose contributions to the family name continue to make us proud. To Andrew and Stephanie, whose business acumen proves the Wilson blood runs strong. He moved down the line, naming family members, even acknowledging several of the grandchildren by name. Jason and I exchanged glances across the table. As it became increasingly clear, we would not be mentioned. And to all gathered here, Marcus concluded, lifting his glass in a final flourish, may the coming year bring continued success and growth to the Wilson name. Glasses clinked in unison as guests echoed the sentiment, sipping their wine or brandy with practiced elegance. The toast rang hollow for me. While most raised their glasses with glowing smiles, only Jason, Diana, and I seemed to register the lingering silence where our names should have been. The unspoken exclusion echoed louder than any toast. As the staff moved in with military precision to clear the dinner plates, Eleanor rose with the grace of someone stepping onto a stage. "Shall we move to the living room for the gift exchange?" she announced brightly. "I believe Santa has been quite generous this year." A murmur of excitement rippled through the room. The children especially perked up. Lily's face lit up with the pure, innocent hope that made me ache. Despite the dinner's slights, she still believed in the magic of the moment. A small part of me clung to that hope, too, praying this would be the part of the evening where the ice melted, where the walls came down. I was about to learn just how naive that hope had been. The living room had been transformed into a winter wonderland, as though lifted straight from a holiday catalog. A massive tree, stretching nearly to the cathedral ceiling, sparkled with hundreds of tiny lights and glittering ornaments. Beneath it, a vast collection of gifts, wrapped in coordinated hues of cream, gold, and deep burgundy, spilled out like a display window from a luxury department store. Each present was adorned with cascading satin ribbons and embossed tags, the same calligraphy used at dinner. The effect was undeniably breathtaking and utterly intimidating. The wealth, the precision, it was all overwhelming, especially for someone like me, raised in modest circumstances where Christmas meant handmade gifts and mismatched lights. Jason and I sat on one of the silk couches, and he rested his hand on my back, his thumb gently moving in small, comforting circles. But his body was tense, his jaw set. "Eleanor has truly outdone herself this year," whispered a woman nearby. "You can tell they were wrapped at Bergdorf's. The ribbons are hand-tied." Near the tree, Marcus took command. He adjusted his reading glasses and pulled out a list from his blazer pocket. Of course, in the Wilson household, even Santa Claus was a corporate role handled by the patriarch. "As is our custom," he said, raising his voice slightly, "gifts will be distributed by age, youngest to oldest among the children." A staff member stepped forward, poised and professional, ready to assist. Emma, Grace's daughter, was first. At 7.5, she was just months younger than Lily. "Emma Wilson," Marcus announced, scanning his list. 5 gifts. The housemen carefully placed the elaborately wrapped packages before Emma. She squealed and immediately began unwrapping them with practiced glee. Inside, a Burberry coat, a custom-made jewelry box with real pearl studs, a sleek new iPad, a leather-bound collection of classic novels, and a certificate for horseback riding lessons at an elite stable. "Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa," she chirped as she flung her arms around them. "Only the best for our little virtuoso," Eleanor cooed, smoothing Emma's curls. Next came Tyler, then cousin after cousin. Each child stepped forward, receiving expensive, personalized gifts. Designer clothes, gadgets, luxury toys. Even the children of Marcus's business partners, who barely qualified as family, were treated like royalty. Through it all, Lily watched with growing silence. At first, her hands were clasped in excitement. Then slowly her fingers began to fidget. She stood straighter, then seemed to shrink. I saw her glance toward us, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Jason's hand found mine, and his grip tightened. I turned to see his jaw flexing, a rare show of emotion from a man who usually embodied calm. The final child, a distant teen relative, was called. The pile of gifts had dwindled to a few adult-sized boxes. Lily stood, the only child yet to receive anything. The room grew quiet, not entirely silent. There were the sounds of unwrapping, the occasional thank you, but among the adults there was a noticeable shift. Eyes flicked from Lily to the tree. Some exchanged awkward glances. Diana's expression turned sharp. Even a few of the children looked puzzled. Marcus cleared his throat. That concludes the children's gifts. Now, we'll begin. You seem to have missed Lily, Jason said, cutting in with a voice low and tight. Marcus looked up, genuinely startled. Oh, let me check. He fumbled with his papers. Eleanor was beside him in an instant, her smile practiced and unflinching. Oh dear, she said, there must have been some confusion. Lily, sweetheart, I'm sure your gifts are here somewhere, she added sweetly, though her eyes avoided mine. I knew. With sickening certainty I knew. This wasn't a mix-up, this wasn't some oversight by a frazzled assistant. This had been planned. A pointed omission, a reminder that we were not truly part of the inner circle. Lily looked down at her polished patent leather shoes. It's okay, Grandma, she said quietly. Maybe Santa got confused. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, trying to ease the tension. Grace busied herself with Emma's gift pile. Stephanie found sudden fascination in a bauble on the tree. I'm sure it's just a delivery mistake, Eleanor continued smoothly. Perhaps they were sent to your house instead, or delayed. On Christmas Eve, Diana whispered, barely audible, but her contempt was clear. I was about to rise, to gather Lily and leave, when Jason gently touched my arm. He stood. Actually, he said, his voice resonant, there is one more gift. Every head turned. Jason reached into his jacket and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. Eleanor blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Marcus frowned. Jason, we agreed to coordinate gifts, Eleanor said, her voice tightening though her smile remained fixed. We didn't want any inconsistencies. Jason didn't respond immediately. He simply held the envelope in his hand, standing tall and calm in the eye of a social storm that had gone suddenly still. I know we agreed, he said finally, but this gift wasn't part of the plan. It's something I wanted to give her myself. He walked across the room, the envelope still in hand. Lily looked up as he approached, her eyes wide and uncertain. Jason knelt beside her and placed the envelope in her small hands. This is for you, sweetheart, he said softly. Lily held the envelope delicately, almost unsure whether she was allowed to accept it. Jason gave her an encouraging nod. Go ahead, open it. She carefully tore open the flap. Inside was a folded letter and a printed photo. She looked at the photo first, then gasped, quietly. Her eyes darted up to Jason, then back to the paper. We're going? She asked in a hushed voice. Jason smiled. We are. Just you, me, and Mom. I leaned forward, trying to see what she held. It was a photograph of an artist retreat in the Adirondacks, a beautiful place, surrounded by woods, cabins, and endless sky. A haven for creativity and peace. And tucked behind it, confirmation of a week-long stay during Lily's winter break. The room was silent. Everyone watched, unsure of how to respond. Jason stood again and faced the room. Lily's been working really hard, he said. She won her school's art competition, and the judges were artists from the Metropolitan Museum. She deserved recognition tonight, and since she didn't get that here, I wanted her to know how proud we are of her anyway. No one spoke. Even Eleanor, the master of social pivoting, seemed to falter for a moment. Jason turned to Lily, beaming, Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Merry Christmas, Daddy, she whispered, hugging the envelope to her chest. And with that, something shifted in the room, not in everyone, but in enough people. Diana raised her glass slightly in our direction. Across the room, a cousin gave a faint nod of respect. Others avoided eye contact entirely. As the party limped back into motion, I looked at Jason, love and gratitude swelling in my chest. He had finally drawn the line. And I realized, the Wilsons could keep their lavish gifts, their coordinated wrapping paper, their curated toasts. We had what truly mattered. And tonight we had finally claimed our place, not in their approval, but in our power. Jason didn't flinch at Eleanor's protests. Instead, he walked calmly across the lavishly decorated room to where Lily stood, still holding her envelope with small, uncertain fingers. He knelt, leveling himself with her, his presence gentle and focused. "This is for you, sweetheart," he said, voice soft but sure. "Your mom and I have been waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Lily glanced at him, then over at me, her brows furrowed, seeking assurance. I gave her a slow, supportive nod, though truthfully I had no idea what Jason had prepared. My heart was racing, my curiosity tangled with anxiety. Jason had been quiet all evening, his silence growing increasingly weighted with meaning. I now understood. It was the calm before a storm he intended to control. With careful, almost reverent hands, Lily slid her finger beneath the seal of the envelope and opened it. The rustle of parchment was the only sound in the room. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Every eye in the room, friends, family, and near strangers, was fixed on my daughter. She pulled out the documents inside, unfolding the pages slowly. Though the formal language and gold-embossed seal meant little to an 8-year-old, the importance was not lost on her. Her small fingers brushed over the emblem like it held magic. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason smiled, and for the first time that night, it wasn't forced. His eyes softened, and emotion shimmered there. Pride, love, and something else. Defiance. "It's your future, Lily," he said clearly, "and we saved it for last because it's the most important gift of all." I sat forward, trying to catch a glimpse of the contents. The elegant font, the legal formatting, it looked official. My mind buzzed with possibilities. Had he bought her art lessons with a renowned painter? A scholarship? I didn't know. And yet, whatever it was, I could feel the ripple of its weight rolling through the room. Lily frowned slightly, still confused. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at her father with eyes that trusted him completely. Jason rose, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then, he turned to face the gathered crowd. His parents, siblings, extended family, all seated in muted shock. His gaze swept over them like a tide, slow and deliberate. "Inside that envelope," he said, voice clear, "are the documents for an education trust fund Heather and I established the day Lily was born." A stir passed through the room. Even those who had perfected the art of indifference leaned in slightly. "We've contributed to it every single month for the past 8 years," he continued, "because we never wanted our daughter's future to depend on approval, conditions, or anyone else's expectations." Eleanor's expression, always so composed, flickered. Her lips parted slightly. Marcus removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly, a gesture that betrayed how rattled he was. Jason didn't stop. "She deserves security that no one can take away if she chooses to pursue a dream that doesn't align with someone else's vision. She deserves the freedom to become exactly who she's meant to be, not who anyone else dictates she should be." My eyes stung with tears. I hadn't known about this trust fund. Jason had kept it quiet, like a sacred promise, and now he was making it public. Not just as a gesture of love to our daughter, but as a statement of rebellion against the culture of control that ruled this family. "And that's not all," Jason said, turning back to Lily. "There's one more thing inside." She shuffled through the pages, pulling out a folded document printed on heavy paper. The logo at the top was unmistakable, a real estate agency. She looked up at Jason, her face full of curiosity. "Beef," Jason said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is proof we've bought our new home. We close in January." A collective gasp rose from the room. Mine was the loudest. We hadn't been house hunting, at least not to my knowledge. Jason met my stunned gaze with a small, sheepish smile. "It's a beautiful house, Lily. 4 bedrooms, a huge backyard with a strong tree just waiting for the treehouse I promised. And the best part?" He turned to face his parents. "It's in Denver, Colorado." For a moment, time stalled. Eleanor took a step back, her hand flying to her pearls as if to steady herself. Marcus's face darkened, his jaw tightening ominously. "Denver," Eleanor managed. That's halfway across the country. 2,000 miles to be exact," Jason confirmed. "I've accepted a position as regional director for our company's Western division." More murmurs filled the room. A few relatives looked stunned. Some averted their eyes. The rest just watched, waiting for what would come next. "We're starting fresh in the new year," Jason added. My throat tightened with emotion. I hadn't seen this coming, but it felt like light breaking through fog. He'd been planning this, quietly, strategically, while I was drowning in Eleanor's barbs and Marcus's indifference. Jason had been carving a path out. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, his voice quiet but menacing. "You have responsibilities here, to the family, to the legacy we've worked to build." "My responsibility," Jason replied calmly, "is to my wife and daughter, to their well-being, their happiness, and their dignity." Lily was still holding the envelope close, her eyes bouncing between the adults. "Are we moving, Mommy?" she asked softly. I nodded, emotion breaking through my composure. "It looks like we are, sweetheart." "But what about my painting?" she asked, pointing toward the gift she had brought, still nestled under the tree, untouched. Her question struck like lightning through the silence. The gift, a labor of love, had been forgotten, just as she nearly had. A few guests looked away, shame flickering in their expressions. Eleanor cleared her throat, struggling to recover. "Jason, this isn't the time or the place for this discussion. We can talk about it in private." "No," Jason said, his tone steely. "This is exactly the right time and place. For 10 years, I've watched you and Dad dismiss Heather. I stayed quiet, hoping you'd come around, hoping you'd see what an incredible woman she is, what a devoted mother." He gestured around the room, his voice unwavering. "But tonight made it clear that's never going to happen. Every child in this room received gifts, some not even part of this family, while my daughter stood with nothing." There was clearly a mix-up, Eleanor interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. Jason turned to her. "Was it a mix-up when Heather was seated across the room at dinner? Was it a mix-up when Lily was left out of the Aspen trip? Was it a mix-up when no one mentioned her art award, even while praising every other child here?" The room was utterly still, the silence speaking volumes. Eleanor looked as if she might speak again, but Jason didn't give her the chance. "This isn't about oversight," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "It's about a pattern, about a culture of exclusion and control that I won't allow to shape my daughter's self-worth." Lily clung to the envelope, her expression uncertain but calm. Her painting still sat beneath the glowing Christmas tree, its wrapping a sharp contrast to the designer packages that had been so carefully handed out. That one small act, a child's gift ignored, had exposed the truth far more clearly than any confrontation ever could. Eleanor slowly turned, as if finally seeing the consequences of years of dismissal laid bare in front of the entire family. But there was no apology, no acknowledgement. Only silence. Jason reached out, gently took Lily's hand and looked back at me. "Ready to go?" I nodded, standing, wrapping my arm around Lily's shoulders. Diana stood as well, reaching down to quietly pick up the painting from beneath the tree. "Here," she said softly, handing it to Lily. "Don't forget your masterpiece." "Thank you," Lily whispered. And with that, we walked out, not in anger, but in strength. Jason had given our daughter more than just a trust fund or a new home. He had given her clarity. He had shown her what it looked like to stand up, to draw a line, to choose love over legacy. Behind us, the Wilsons sat stunned in their cathedral of tradition. Ahead of us was a fresh start. And for the first time in a decade, I finally felt free. No one had ever dared speak to Eleanor and Marcus Wilson like this. Not friends, not extended family, and certainly not their golden boy. Jason, their dependable, ever-accommodating son, had shattered the long-standing tradition of silence and submission with a voice that carried not anger, but certainty. "I've spent years trying to bridge two worlds," Jason continued, the edge in his voice giving way to a quieter resolve. "Hoping you'd eventually accept the family I chose, but I realize now, you can't build a bridge when one side refuses to meet you halfway." Marcus stepped forward, his mouth drawn in a tight line. "If you go through with this, if you move across the country without consulting us, there will be consequences," he warned. "Financial consequences." Jason's reaction was calm, almost serene. For the first time that evening, he smiled. A small, steady smile, devoid of apology. "I'm well aware, Dad," he said. "But the truth is, Heather and I have never needed your money. We've built our security on our own terms." He turned toward Lily, who stood between us, clutching her envelope like a fragile piece of treasure. "What we're giving you, Lily," he said softly, "isn't just a house or money for college. It's something far more powerful. It's freedom. The freedom to grow into whoever you want to be without having to earn love through performance or perfection." Tears streamed down my face now, unchecked. I moved beside Jason and placed my hand in his. Whatever was waiting for us in Denver, new jobs, new schools, new routines, we'd face it together. "We should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason nodded, then looked out across the room, his final words echoing like the closing lines of a novel. "Merry Christmas, everyone." He turned to Lily. "Would you like to give Grandma and Grandpa your gift before we leave?" Lily hesitated, eyes searching mine. I nodded gently. With quiet resolve, she walked to the base of the glittering tree, bent down, and retrieved her carefully wrapped watercolor painting. Then she approached her grandparents, two towering figures who had spent the evening ignoring her. "I made this for you," she said simply, holding out the gift. "I won first place." Eleanor, perhaps caught off guard by the dignity in her granddaughter's voice, took the package with slow hands. Her expression wavered, between pride, guilt, and something she couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Lily," she murmured, her voice oddly subdued. We turned to go. The moment should have ended there, but from behind us came an unexpected voice. "Wait," said Andrew, rising from his chair. I froze, bracing for another rebuke, but Andrew's eyes were on Jason, and his face looked different. Not defensive, but disturbed. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "All of it." Jason looked back, surprised. So was I. "This family has become obsessed with appearances and performance," Andrew continued. "We've lost sight of what matters. Real love, real connection." He turned to his parents. "Is this what you want your legacy to be? Grandchildren who believe their worth is tied to violin recitals and riding ribbons?" Eleanor flushed. "Andrew, this is not the time." "It's exactly the time," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Because if Jason walks out of here tonight with this kind of pain unresolved, you're going to lose him. You might already have." For the first time, silence fell not from discomfort but reflection. Eleanor's eyes flicked between her sons, one leaving, the other daring to speak. For a fleeting second I saw something break in her polished veneer. Regret? Or calculation? I couldn't tell. Then Marcus stepped forward and rested a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "We've indulged Jason's unconventional choices for years," he said coldly. "If he chooses to sever ties, so be it." Jason nodded, as though he'd expected that answer. "Goodbye, Dad." "Mom?" He took my hand in one and Lily's in the other. As we exited the Wilson mansion, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and freedom. The old walls behind us no longer held any power. The moment we crossed the threshold, something unspoken dissolved. We were no longer bound by trying to fit in. In the car, Lily climbed into the back seat, her envelope clutched tightly to her chest. She looked up, her voice barely audible. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" Jason and I exchanged a pained glance. It was the kind of question only a child could ask. Pure, direct, cutting. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "They're not mad at you. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. They get so focused on what they think matters, they forget what really does." "Like my painting?" she asked. "Exactly like your painting," Jason replied, turning the key in the ignition. "But you know what?" he added with a smile. "We're going to frame that painting. It's going to hang in our new house in Denver, right where everyone can see it." Lily nodded, her eyes sleepy but content. "I can make another one. I'm getting better every day."
We drove away from the estate in silence, the Christmas lights growing smaller behind us, swallowed by the snowy night. I reached for Jason's hand. The trust fund, the house, the job in Denver. So many decisions made in secret, each one now a step toward a life free of shame and pretense. "Thank you," I whispered. Jason squeezed my hand. "Merry Christmas, Heather." From the back seat, Lily's voice piped up again. "Can we still have Christmas tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice steady. "I think this might be our best Christmas yet." As we drove, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the road in white. Streetlights cast golden halos over the windshield, and the wipers moved rhythmically, the only sound besides the quiet hum of the engine. Our breath fogged the windows, and the car's warmth felt cocoon-like, a barrier from the cold chaos we had just left behind. I turned in my seat to watch Lily as she slept, her head resting against the window, one arm curled protectively around the envelope. There was a serenity in her face that hadn't been there hours before, as if even in sleep, she sensed the shift in our family story. Jason kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight as if bracing for something. I could tell the weight of what had just happened was settling on him. He had challenged the foundation of his upbringing, spoken truths out loud that had simmered in silence for years. I reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "You did something incredible tonight," I said softly. "For Lily, for all of us." He exhaled slowly. "I should have done it sooner. I kept hoping they'd change." "Am I one?" I replied, "but we did. We chose something better." Stacey nodded, "And I won't let them twist her into something she's not. I want Lily to grow up knowing she's enough, as she is." In the silence that followed, I felt the fullness of that truth settle in my chest. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the end of an entire book. And ahead of us, a new story waited, one where we defined our worth, our family, our traditions. By the time we pulled into our driveway, the snow was nearly ankle deep. Jason carried Lily inside while I followed with her envelope and the painting. The house felt humble after the Wilson estate, but every corner glowed with warmth. With us. As we tucked Lily into bed, she stirred slightly. "Are we still having pancakes tomorrow?" she mumbled. "Force," I whispered, "with extra whipped cream." She smiled and drifted back to sleep. Downstairs, Jason and I sat on the couch, still in our coats, holding hands. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world. Inside, there was only peace. Tonight hadn't gone as planned. Jason's voice, quiet but raw, filled the space between us. "I didn't mean to announce it like that. I thought I'd tell you tomorrow morning with breakfast and coffee and a gift under the tree, but when I saw Lily standing there, surrounded by opulence but completely overlooked, something inside me snapped." His throat tightened and he paused to gather himself. "I've made excuses for my parents for years. I told myself they just needed time to come around, to see you and Lily for who you really are, but tonight proved they never will. Watching them hurt our daughter like that, it made everything crystal clear." We pulled into our driveway, the modest string of multicolored Christmas lights we'd hung together, flickering gently in the winter night. Our home looked so different from the Wilson estate, smaller, humbler, but it radiated something theirs never could: warmth. Jason turned off the engine, but stayed seated. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to me. "I should have talked to you before deciding. I got caught up in making sure it was all perfect. If you don't want to move, we won't. The job's amazing, yeah, but it's nothing if it costs us our happiness." I reached out, brushing my fingers along the stubble on his jaw. "Tell me about the house." His expression softened. "It's a craftsman-style place, about 100 years old, but fully renovated. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a finished basement I thought could be your art studio. And the backyard, it's got this enormous oak tree, perfect for a tree house. There's a park just a few blocks away, and the school district, top-notch." My heart warmed at the image of Lily playing under that oak tree. "And the job, regional director for the Western Division. Better pay, better hours, and a company culture that actually values people's lives outside work. I'll be home for dinner. No more endless late nights trying to impress my dad." He took a deep breath. "But more than that, it's a fresh start. A life on our terms, no more walking on eggshells, no more trying to prove anything to anyone." I let his words settle. For a decade, I'd tried to win over the Wilsons, and recently I'd seen Lily start that same heartbreaking quest. Her tiny, innocent heart still believed that if she just tried hard enough, if she painted the perfect picture or wore the perfect dress, she could win their affection. But that was a battle she should never have had to fight. "Denver sounds perfect," I said softly. "When do we move?" He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We close January 15th. I start work February 1st. "That's soon." "I'm too soon?" "No." I smiled. "Just right." He grinned. Then gently, he turned in his seat, reached into the back, and lifted Lily into his arms. She stirred slightly, murmuring something incoherent before nestling against his chest. Together, we stepped into our home, the one we'd be saying goodbye to in just a few weeks. It was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture, imperfect walls, and a Christmas tree that leaned ever so slightly to the right. No symmetrical ornaments or coordinated wrapping paper, just handmade crafts from Lily's school projects, souvenirs from family vacations, and tinsel that Lily had insisted on adding herself. We laid Lily in bed, tucked her under her favorite blanket, and kissed her goodnight. Downstairs, Jason and I curled up on the couch beneath one of our old fleece throws. Our little tree twinkled nearby. It wasn't grand, it wasn't magazine-worthy, but it was us. "There's more," Jason said, gently taking my hand in his, "about the trust fund." I looked at him curiously. It wasn't just something I set up myself. The foundation of it came from my grandfather. "Your grandfather?" I asked, confused. Eleanor's dad? Jason nodded. He passed away while I was still in college, but he had this provision in his will. Each grandchild was to receive a trust for their future children. My parents were the initial trustees. They were supposed to hold it until each great-grandchild turned 18. I blinked. Wait, so they control that money? Not anymore, Jason said. When Lily was born, I had the family lawyer file paperwork transferring the trusteeship to me. Quietly, legally. They don't know. They've never had access to a cent of it. And when your father threatened to cut us off, he was bluffing, Jason said. Or rather, he didn't know he was bluffing. They can change their will, but they can't touch Lily's trust. I stared at him, overwhelmed. How much is in it? You don't need to know the number, he said gently. Just know it's enough. For college, grad school, a home, or whatever life she dreams of. And I've been adding to it every single month since the day she was born. Tears welled in my eyes. You've been preparing for this, for our independence, for 8 years? I hoped it wouldn't come to this, he admitted, but I needed to be ready in case it did. I just didn't want to believe my parents would never change. And what about now? About your relationship with them? I won't cut them out completely, he said, his voice steady. But I'm drawing a line. If they want to be in our lives, they'll treat you with respect, and they'll love Lily like they love their other grandkids. No conditions. No comparisons. Do you think they'll ever come around? Jason hesitated. Honestly, I don't know. My dad, probably not. But my mom, maybe, eventually. Either way, I'm done waiting for their approval. I leaned into him, feeling more secure and loved than I had in years. What about the gifts under our tree? I asked. Should we still do Christmas tomorrow? Jason gave me the warmest smile I'd seen all evening. Absolutely. In fact, let's make it the best Christmas ever. A new tradition for our new beginning. I love you, I whispered. I've always loved you, but tonight I fell in love with you all over again. I love you too, he replied, pulling me close. We sat there in the soft glow of our little Christmas tree, wrapped in mismatched fleece blankets, surrounded by the quiet of our home. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, cloaking the neighborhood in silence. The future was uncertain, a new state, a new job, new routines, but the most important pieces were already in place: trust, love, and the unwavering promise that we would face it all together. The years of smiling through snubs, of swallowing hurt for the sake of peace were behind us now. We were writing a new story, one where our daughter grew up knowing her worth had nothing to do with legacy or bloodlines, and everything to do with who she was. I glanced at the gifts under our tree, each one wrapped in the joyful chaos of a real family. Some in leftover wrapping paper from last year, others hastily taped but filled with thought. Tomorrow we'd open them, share cinnamon rolls and laughter, and start laying the foundation of our own traditions. No more waiting to be invited, no more hoping to be enough. We already were. Jason rested his forehead against mine. Next year, he said softly, we'll decorate the new house together. Maybe Lily can paint ornaments. She'll love that, I whispered back, and we'll hang her winning painting right in the front hall. He smiled. Let the Wilsons have their estates and pearls. We have something better. And as the lights on our tree twinkled gently, I knew he was right. We had each other. And that was everything. More than any family name, more than any inheritance or social standing, Jason looked at me with a quiet fierceness. You and Lily are my real legacy. As we sat together beneath the warm glow of our little Christmas tree, wrapped in the kind of light that felt earned rather than curated, I finally understood the depth of the gift Jason had given us. It wasn't just a trust fund. It wasn't even the house or the new job in Denver. It was freedom. Freedom from bending ourselves into shapes that would never be accepted. Freedom to stop measuring our worth by someone else's approval. Freedom to be a family, unconditionally loved, without performative affection or passive-aggressive reminders of our perceived inadequacy. That envelope had held our future. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the early sun dancing across fresh snow that blanketed our neighborhood in pristine white. I stirred awake to find Lily perched at the foot of our bed, her wide eyes glowing with anticipation and her voice not quite a whisper. Is it time yet? It was 6:30 a.m. I nudged Jason. Santa's been here, I told Lily with a smile. Why don't you check your stocking while we wake up? Lily was off in a flash, the sound of her footsteps bounding down the stairs a joyful contrast to the solemn silence of the previous night. Jason rolled onto his side, eyes barely open. "Merry Christmas," he murmured. "Merry Christmas," I replied, brushing his hair back and kissing his forehead. "Ready for our last Christmas in this house?" The memory of the night before came rushing back, and he sat up, suddenly alert. "Are you really okay with all this? The move, the job change, everything?" I nodded. "More than okay. I feel like I can finally breathe." Lily's delighted gasp from downstairs called us from bed. We pulled on robes and made our way to the living room. The sight that greeted us wasn't polished or extravagant. Our tree leaned a little, ornaments were handmade and unmatched, and the fireplace crackled with a log that had taken 3 tries to catch last night. All but it was ours. We'd gone a bit overboard with Lily's gifts this year, not in quantity, but in meaning. A professional set of watercolor paints, the hardcover box set of her favorite book series, a tablet loaded with educational games, and the crown jewel, a handcrafted dollhouse from a local artisan fair. Every gift chosen with love, not image. Lily tore into them with giddy abandon. Just then, the doorbell rang. Jason and I looked at each other, puzzled. Who visits at 7 a.m. on Christmas Day? He answered it and returned moments later, stunned. Andrew stood behind him, snow on his coat, flanked by his 3 children. "Sorry to barge in," he said, looking slightly sheepish. "The kids wanted to see their cousin, and I wanted to see you, make sure you were okay." Jason blinked. "Aren't Mom and Dad expecting you?" Andrew exhaled, his expression shifting. "After you left last night, things got heated. I told them what they did to Lily was unacceptable. Dad didn't take it well." "You stood up to Dad?" Jason asked, almost incredulous. Andrew nodded. "Long overdue." We left. I packed the kids and checked into a hotel. No big plan, just couldn't let them think their behavior was okay. His kids moved toward Lily, shyness melting into smiles as they held out small gift bags. "We brought these for you," said Andrew's oldest. "Merry Christmas, Lily."
Lily looked to me and I nodded. She opened the bags carefully. Inside were thoughtful, handmade gifts. Sketchbooks, colored pencils, a friendship bracelet from Andrew's daughter. Her face lit up. "I have something too," she said, and dashed upstairs. She returned moments later with a handful of her drawings. I didn't have time to wrap them. "They're perfect," Andrew said sincerely, admiring her art. "You're very talented, Lily." As the kids sprawled across the floor, comparing gifts and trading stories, Andrew pulled us aside. "There's more," he said. "Mom showed up at my hotel around midnight." Jason's eyebrows shot up. What did she want? "To convince me to come back and preserve the Wilson image," Andrew said dryly. "But when I said no, she broke down. Like really broke down." "Manipulation," I murmured. "Maybe, but I think just maybe she's realizing she's not invincible anymore, that she might actually lose her kids. Her grandkids?" Jason shook his head. "Too little, too late. We're still moving to Denver. That's done." "I know," Andrew said. "And you should. I just thought you should know. There are cracks showing." "Dad?" Jason asked. Furious. "Already talking about wills and trust restructuring and cutting you out of the family business?" Jason exchanged a look with me. "Doesn't change anything." The doorbell rang again. I opened it this time, half expecting Eleanor's frosty silhouette. Instead, it was Diana, holding a thermos of coffee and a box of cinnamon rolls. "Reinforcement?" she said with a wink. I laughed. "Come in. You just made Christmas even better." Within minutes, our living room was filled with voices and warmth. The couch overflowed with bodies. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee. Lily, flanked by her cousins, held court in the center, showing off her dollhouse and explaining her latest painting ideas. For once, she was the center of attention, and not because of pity, but because her spirit was finally being seen and celebrated. Deanna leaned over. "Whatever you said to Jason last night, it changed everything." I shook my head. He already knew. He just finally stopped hiding it. Outside, snow shimmered in the sunlight, blanketing the past. Inside, we were building something new, something stronger. There would be fallout. Marcus would rage. Eleanor might call, full of apologies and veiled manipulations. The family legacy they'd tried to impose would fracture further. that we weren't afraid anymore. We had love, we had clarity, and we had each other. That was the true gift of Christmas. I hope it's not too early, Diana said with a gentle smile, holding out a festive gift bag. I just wanted to drop this off for Lily, and to tell you both how much I admired what you did last night. I welcomed her in, genuinely touched by her presence. She wasn't the only surprise that morning. One by one, other visitors arrived, Jason's cousin Michael and his wife, both of whom had always been quietly kind to me, and a few family friends who had witnessed last night's confrontation. They came not to take sides, but to affirm what they saw, that something brave had happened. And then, to my absolute surprise, Grace showed up. She stood uncertainly in the entryway, still bundled in her designer coat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mom sent me," she admitted. "She wants you to come back for Christmas dinner," she says. "Last night was a misunderstanding, that Lily's gifts must have been misplaced." Jason's eyes hardened. "We both know that's not true, Grace." Grace fidgeted. "That's what she's telling everyone, and Dad's furious about Andrew leaving. The whole Christmas is unraveling." "They want us back to preserve appearances," I said flatly. "But we're having our own Christmas. Here." Grace looked around, at our modest but joy-filled living room, the happy children, the comfortable chaos, and for a moment I saw it, envy, or maybe yearning. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, moving to Denver. "Yes," Jason said, "and building a life based on love, not obligation." Grace nodded slowly. "I should get back. Emma has a recital this afternoon." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth. I'm sorry about Lily's gifts. That wasn't my decision." We both knew it wasn't quite an apology, but perhaps it was a beginning. The day unfolded into a celebration we hadn't expected. Andrew and his kids stayed for breakfast, which turned into lunch, then an impromptu game night. Diana brought more food and a bottle of champagne, toasting our new start with genuine delight. As the last of our guests prepared to leave, Andrew pulled Jason aside for a quiet conversation. I watched them from across the room. Two brothers rediscovering trust. "What was that about?" I asked, after we'd closed the door behind the final guest. "He's thinking of moving too," Jason said, sounding surprised. "Not to Denver, but away from here. Last night made him realize how much of himself he's lost trying to please our parents." I shook my head in wonder. One envelope really did change everything. Jason corrected me gently. "Not the envelope. The choice to finally prioritize what matters." That night, once Lily was in bed, tired but glowing with the joy of being seen and loved, we sat by the tree, wrapped in each other's arms. "I've been thinking about that painting Lily gave your parents," I said. "What about it?" "I'm going to ask her to make another one, a new painting, for Denver. I want it to be the first thing we hang on the wall." Jason kissed my temple. "I love that. A fresh start, with the things that matter most front and center." I hesitated. "Do you regret it, challenging your parents, risking your inheritance?" He thought for a long moment. "I regret not doing it sooner. Every time I didn't speak up, every time they made you feel small, every time they overlooked Lily. I regret all of that. But last night? No, that was long overdue." 1 year later, Denver felt like home. The snow here was drier and finer, the air thinner, and the sunsets over the Rockies were breathtaking. Our Craftsman house, with its wide porch and big backyard, had become a place of comfort. The treehouse was complete, nestled in the limbs of that giant oak. My art studio in the finished basement was finally filled with supplies and natural light. Jason's new job offered more time for what mattered. He coached Lily's soccer team, helped her with homework, and made dinner most nights. Lily thrived. She made friends easily and entered a regional art contest, proudly submitting a new piece she titled The Gift. We hung it in the hallway, as promised, the first thing guests saw when they entered. The Promise Trust Fund had been legally transferred to Lily's name, with us as trustees until she turned 25. It wasn't just about money. It was about liberation. From manipulation. From legacy. From the idea that love had to be earned. Andrew had indeed moved, taking a job in Chicago. He visited us twice, and the cousins kept in touch through calls, emails, and letters. Their bond had deepened into something real. Eleanor, for her part, made several attempts at reconciliation. Birthday cards, gifts, holiday calls. But she never truly acknowledged what she had done. The apologies were always veiled in excuses or couched in misunderstandings. Once, she asked to visit, but canceled last minute. Marcus? He followed through on every threat. Jason was formally removed from any stake in the family business. The legal notices came in neat envelopes, ironically mirroring the envelope that had started it all. Jason read them, signed what needed signing, and filed them away without a word. But the most surprising turn came from Grace. She began calling more often. Short, hesitant calls at first, always centered around Emma. Then she started asking about Lily's art, about my job, about Jason. When Emma won an art contest, Grace sent a photo of her with her award and asked if we'd show Lily, saying Emma looked up to her cousin. That moment, small as it was, felt like the first brick laid towards something new. By the next Christmas, we'd created new traditions. Lily painted a winter scene to hang above the fireplace. We cut our own tree. We wrapped gifts with brown paper and Lily's hand-drawn designs. We invited neighbors over for cider, board games, and stories. No seating charts, no control, no obligations. Every year now, we read aloud from the framed trust fund envelope, reminding Lily, "Your future belongs to you." Because that's what we gave her. Not privilege, not wealth, but freedom. To be her full self. And to never again question her worth. 6 months after our move, I received a call from Grace. Unexpected, her voice barely recognizable, stripped of its usual polish. She sounded vulnerable, even hesitant, as she asked about the everyday details of our new life. What school Lily attended, how the treehouse was coming along, whether I was still teaching art in a school that valued creativity. Each question felt like a cautious bridge she was building toward something new. 3 months later, she arrived unannounced, this time with Emma in tow, staying for a weekend that began awkwardly. The first evening, we all sat around our mismatched dining table, the silence thick with everything left unsaid. But by Sunday afternoon, something had shifted. Lily and Emma, armed with watercolors and sketch pads, found themselves lost in shared projects, painting a landscape of the Rockies, designing whimsical animal characters, pointing out color theory like tiny artistic mentors. Watching them, I saw Grace's expression soften, the tension between her and me dissolving into something more tender. Late that night, long after the kids had been sent to bed, Grace poured us both a glass of red wine. She admitted she'd begun to question the values she'd internalized for so long, the relentless pursuit of accolades, the obsession with appearances, the endless comparisons between her children and my daughter. "I've been living a life that's not mine," she whispered. "I don't want that for Emma." In that moment, under the warm light of our living room, I recognized the spark of awakening, the first sign that a new legacy might emerge in the Wilson line. Now, as we prepared for our second Christmas in Denver, I looked around our home with profound gratitude. Lily's latest paintings hung proudly on the walls, one of our craftsman house in snow, another of her and Emma drawing together in the basement, artifacts of growing together, not apart. A painting of Denver at dusk held the place of honor in our living room, capturing the glow we'd all found here. Our Christmas tree stood tall in the corner, adorned with a medley of ornaments. Colorful glass snowflakes brought from a winter market, hand-carved wooden hearts that Lily made in her art class, a tiny mountain moose carved by a local artisan, and the classic baubles from our childhoods. Each told a story, weaving together our past and present. The doorbell rang, and Lily darted to answer it, excitement bubbling over. We weren't expecting blood relatives. Instead, our house soon filled with the laughter and chatter of our chosen family, neighbors who had become dear friends, former classmates of Lily's and Andrew's kids who hopped in with their gift bags and outrageous holiday sweaters. The room buzzed with warmth, sincerity, and messy joy. Nothing like the sterile, perfect gatherings of our old life. From across the room, I caught Jason's eye. He lifted his glass in a silent toast. To our journey, to courage, and to the one envelope that shifted the axis of our lives. He mouthed, "Everything changed." And I nodded back, my heart full. "How's it all feel?" Jason asked as he joined me, voice quiet among the laughter. I took a breath and smiled. Perfect, absolutely perfect. If you've ever had to defy family expectations or make tough choices to protect your child's well-being, I'd love to hear your story. Please share it below. If our journey resonated, please consider subscribing for more heartfelt stories about choosing authenticity over obligation. Like and share if this touched your heart. Your support means more than words. Wishing you a holiday season brimming with genuine love, joy, and celebration in whichever community you choose to call family.